Welcome to Sinister Heroes! I'm your host, Danny Iniquitous. Thank you for tuning in. If you're new to the channel, this is a channel about Dungeons and Dragons. We try and take a darker tone with everything we do here. If you like that kind of edgier content, please like, share, and subscribe. Please keep commenting. We'd love to hear about the stories from the characters you played and the DMs that have let you play and do these incredible things. Without further ado, we're going to jump into this week's video, the Lunar Sorcerer. The Lunar Sorcerer comes to us from Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragonqueen. It has a great flavor text that kind of explains a little bit of the difference of the worlds between Dragonlance, Eberron, Toril, and how that kind of all works together. Read into it, it's a great way to base on how your Lunar Sorcerer looks, the ideas behind how magic works, and especially the lunar cycles of Dragonlance. It's important, it's integral to the class. And it does give you this great idea as to what your character should be. Whether they're just pale and shrouds themselves in grays and light blues and faded colors like that. And really kind of embodies that bright full moon. Or maybe they're like crooked. Maybe they're deceitful and so they are crescent. You know, like you can create a lot of cool things based on how you see the different stages of the moon and have that affect your character. Maybe they're part of a family and maybe their different stages were where they were born and they inherited those qualities into their personality and that's what made them dynamically different. And they exist maybe in your world and maybe they're cool things to interact with, or maybe they died in your backstory and you somehow inherited their power when you were born and that's what made you a sorcerer. And so now you dance between the three of them and almost inheriting a different aspect of them, where your personality is affected. Maybe you're angry like your uncle, or you're compassionate like your mother or something, and it's all tied to you. And it really just works in this wonderful kind of a way that gives you this ability to shapeshift and change and cycle through, which is a very big theme that you should really incorporate into your sorcerer. At level 1, you gain access to Lunar Embodiment. You learn additional spells when you reach certain levels in this class, as shown on the Lunar Spells table. Each of these spells counts as a sorcerer spell for you, and it doesn't count against the number of sorcerer spells you know. Whenever you finish a long rest, you can choose what lunar phase manifests its power through your magic. Full moon, new moon, or crescent moon. When in the chosen phase, you can cast one first level spell of the associated phase in the Lunar Spells table once without expending a spell slot. Once you cast a spell in this way, you cannot do so again until you finish a long rest. Now, understand a first level spell is going to change dynamically in its purposes the further levels you go. So as first level spells in Full Moon, you gain Shield, New Moon, Ray of Sickness, and Crescent Moon Color Spray. Now, Shield will be useful almost throughout the game. So it's a great basis. You're probably going to want to be Full Moon a lot of the time anyway if you're looking for more defensive and opportunistic things to do. New Moon, you get Ray of Sickness, which is really only going to be viable against certain enemies and especially early on. Imposing disadvantage is great, but poison damage is not. If you're fighting giants, if you're fighting anything that is not undead, fiends, or dwarves, you have a great opportunity to hit it with this, and it works. It does pretty good damage. The problem is, again, what you're fighting and your purpose. New Moon tends to be rather offensive in nature, so it kind of brings this like youthful audacity to it, which I think is cool. And maybe you can incorporate something with the different moon phases as to, again, like I mentioned before, cycles of your personality. Maybe you're a little mentally unstable. Maybe it's the moon that made you crazy. That's where lunacy comes from anyway. And Crescent Moon has to do with a lot of illusionist kind of things. Color Spray is good. Color Spray will be useful throughout a good portion of the game, as it does create quite a strong disable. Again, later on, these spells aren't going to really matter too much, so you'll probably end up sticking with Full Moon a lot of the times at higher levels. And Ray of Sickness and New Moon probably earlier on. And Crescent Moon kind of just dancing in between whenever you feel like you might want to grab some of these things. The second ability you gain at first level is Moonfire. You can call down the radiant light of the moon on command. You learn the Sacred Flame spell, which doesn't count against the number of sorcerer cantrips you know. When you cast a spell, you can target one creature as normal, or two creatures within range that are within 5 feet of each other. This is an underrated change. Not only does Sacred Flame do radiant damage, on top of that, it's a dex save, so you'll hit this pretty often. And being able to hit two enemies close to each other really adds up as far as damage is concerned. Very few cantrips do this. The only one that I know about is Acid Splash. You would need a melee kind of AoE cantrip like Sword Burst or Thunderclap in order to be able to really do anything similar to this. But this gives you a good range, a good damage type, and the ability to hit two enemies that are close to each other. There are plenty of times where that happens, so you can maximize this pretty effectively. This also gives you this great precedence to create this kind of melee caster almost. And I say melee, but I don't actually mean going into melee combat. But now you just, this entity that walks out in the battlefield and just throws its hand out and just rains moonfire, coming down from the sky in this beautiful pillar of light. And it almost seems like that's your go-to attack because of what it can do. And so now you're adding this thing, and now this is your regular attack. So maybe the focus of a Lunar Sorcerer is more so on concentration spells and keeping that going while just continuously raining down the power of the moon. And I like that idea of using a cantrip not just as an option and jumping in between a bunch of different cantrips, but as your main attack. That Sacred Flame is now your hammer. That is now your sword and board. And it gives you this great availability to throw out a concentration, maybe use Quicken Spell to turn it into a bonus action, and then use your regular attack to keep it going. It's a great concept, and it kind of builds away from the traditional spellcaster where you're just dropping spells constantly, where all you want to do is just hit big numbers and disable as many things possible. Where now you really want to focus on creating lunacy, creating this disruption that you can, because your main focus of damage is Sacred Flame, so maybe you lean towards heavy disables, which is a cool concept that you don't really see as often. At 6th level, you'll continue with the sorcerer tradition of getting 2 abilities, and the first you'll get is Lunar Boons. Your current phase of your lunar embodiment can affect your meta magic feature. Each lunar embodiment phase is associated with certain schools of magic, as shown here: full moon, abjuration and divination spells; new moon, enchantment and necromancy spells; crescent moon, illusion and transmutation spells. Whenever you use a meta magic on a spell of a school of magic associated with your current lunar embodiment phase, you can reduce the sorcery points spent by 1. You can reduce the sorcery points spent for your meta magic a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, and you regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. This is one of those abilities that it's great because it helps your sorcery points go further, and since they are so limited, it's a very big boon, making them last longer, making them cost less. The problem is the amount of cheat sheets and notes and customizing your spell list to reflect this and to know which spells you're using at what point when you selected your lunar embodiment is taxing. It's a lot of preparation. You have to be very diligent. I don't mind putting in a lot of work into my characters and going crazy coming up with concepts like this, but that's just me. That's kind of how I tend to go with everything. I'm pretty meticulous with my classes, my abilities, and my spells, selecting them, choosing them. This is a lot of work for someone that isn't prepared for it. It is a big bonus, making those sorcery points go further. You have to be the kind of sorcerer that spends sorcery points regularly to receive this benefit. Again, you can only use this a certain amount of times equal to your proficiency bonus, but saving a couple of sorcery points and shaving them off something else is wildly beneficial. At level 6, you probably have 3. Maybe you're getting close to the area where you hit 4. But now you're rocking out 3 times, shaving off sorcery points. So you'll always have 3 extra sorcery points by the end of your day because of this. That is valuable. If you're consuming spells to creating spell slots, if you're using meta magics, this makes that go further. Your other 6th level ability is Waxing and Waning. You gain greater control over the phases of your lunar magic. As a bonus action, you can spend 1 sorcery point to change your current lunar embodiment phase to a different one. You can now cast 1 first level spell from each phase of the lunar spells table once without expending a spell slot, provided your current phase is the same as the lunar phase spell. Once you cast a lunar phase spell in this way, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest. That last portion is a little bit confusing, and what it means is previously you could only be in 1 lunar phase per long rest, so you could cast only that 1 first level spell once per day. You can now swap in and cast each one of those first level spells by switching your phase of the moon, but you can only do that once per moon lunar phase. It's a little tricky. Once you get your head wrapped around it, it's really not so bad. The other ability to change your lunar phase as a whole, it does give you access to the other spells, which is nice. So you can switch out and gain some of the spells you need for your benefit in case you find yourself in a situation you weren't properly prepared for. This, I feel, causes a lot of disruption mentally behind the theory of the character. I like the idea that you can switch it, I guess, day by day. I feel like there should be maybe something that's a little bit more outside of your hands in order to do that. Maybe you roll for it. I kind of appreciate that better. Give it a little bit of random, a little RNG excitement. But the phases are important to you. And the further you go, you're probably going to like your 1 phase and be like, that's the phase I'm going to use. And it's going to be harder for you to deviate from that. So maybe higher levels, you really won't appreciate this that much. It's really just for the kind of player that has the mentality of being able to go with the ebb and flow of the world that you're in. You know, with maybe you missed a session, you came back and you're in a totally different scenario. It's a good way to balance yourself out. But ultimately, this is greatly going to affect that first level spell. So the higher up you go, maybe it's going to be shield. So it's going to really lose its potency rather quickly. I think this is kind of just a tie-in just to give you an option to get out of saying, oh no, I made a bad choice and now I'm stuck with it. At 14th level, you gain access to Lunar Empowerment. The power of a lunar phase saturates your being. While you are in a lunar embodiment phase, you also gain the following benefit associated with that phase. While you are in full moon, you can use a bonus action to shed bright light in a 10-foot radius and dim light for an additional 10 feet, or to douse the light in addition. You and creatures of your choice have advantage on intelligence, investigation, and wisdom perception checks while within the bright light you shed. If you're in the new moon phase, you have advantage on dexterity stealth checks. In addition, while you are entirely in darkness, attack rolls have disadvantage against you. While in the crescent moon phase, you have resistance to necrotic and radiant damage. This works great with that concept of what a lunar phase means to you. It's cool. These are passively always on, except for the full moon bonus action, which you can activate. It is a great thing to be able to have 2 resistances, although necrotic and radiant are probably equally the same encounter rate. But if you're playing a game where you're fighting a lot of undead, which kind of happens often, at 14th level, this is kind of endgame content, so this is a very big defensive bonus for you. Advantage on dexterity stealth checks is great in case you need to sneak up on someone. You should have some sort of dexterity. As a sorcerer, you want to be able to go first. You want anything you can do to help your AC. Beneficial dexterity is just a great ability score to have. And being able to shed bright light is phenomenal. You don't have to worry about being a race that has dark vision if you make it this far and don't need it. The advantage on perception investigations is great. It helps if you're fighting vampires because you're in bright light, which is going to really, really hurt them. Or fighting drow, or if you're on the Underdark. Anything that has sunlight sensitivity, this is going to be a great boon for you. And you'll be fighting enemies of that caliber anyway. So it's not the worst thing in the world to have. Plus, it'll help you in adventuring things, finding out what happened in a scenario, checking, looking for things, investigating, trying to find what an action took place here or what the next move is for the people that were here. Useful, beneficial. It's all just passive, though, and it really doesn't feel like that great of a big boon, especially this high level. I kind of wish this came on at 6th level as opposed to that other ability of waxing and waning. At 18th level, you gain access to the final Lunar Sorcerer ability, Lunar Phenomenon. As a bonus action, you can tap into a special power of your current lunar embodiment phase. Alternatively, as part of the bonus action you take to change your lunar phase using the waxing and waning feature, you can immediately use the power of the lunar phase you are entering. Full moon. You radiate moonlight for a moment. Each creature of your choice within 30 feet of you must succeed on a Constitution saving throw against your spell save DC or be blinded until the end of its next turn. In addition, one creature of your choice in that area regains 3d8 hit points. New Moon. You momentarily emanate gloom. Each creature of your choice within 30 feet of you must succeed on a dexterity saving throw against your spell save DC or take 3d10 necrotic damage and have its speed reduced to 0 until the end of its next turn. In addition, you become invisible until the end of your next turn or until immediately after you make an attack roll or cast a spell. Crescent Moon. You can magically teleport to an unoccupied space you can see within 60 feet of yourself. You can bring along one willing creature you can see within 5 feet of yourself. That creature teleports to an unoccupied space of your choice that you can see within 5 feet of your destination space. In addition, you and that creature gain resistance to all damage until the start of your next turn. Once you use one of these bonus action benefits, you can't use that benefit again until you finish a long rest, unless you spend 5 sorcery points to use it again. Lunar Phenomenon and waxing and waning are meant to work together, as you can use this when you use your waxing waning feature to just create these effects. You obviously won't be using these often. To spend 5 sorcery points to do any one of these seems like kind of a lot. Thunderstep basically covers Crescent Moon, so you'll probably never use that one. The 3d10 necrotic damage is great. The real kicker is the 0 movement speed until the end of its next turn. So if anything even has flight, it can't move, it can't fly, it can't go anywhere because it has 0 movement speed. If you have enemies at a distance that's 30 feet and you can get them with this, that is a great way to halt the advance of powerful enemies, to put them in their place and make sure they can't do anything. Full Moon is great. It's a great way to kind of put in this blind effect, which will give all of your friends advantage on anyone who happens to fail, and being able to throw a heal out there that you don't have and maybe bring somebody back up, it might be worth it. It might just be worth it just for that opportunity to save someone in a dire clutch scenario. Again, con saves tend to be very, very high for enemies, and blindness, deafness at this point is going to be very, very particular. You're going to want to use this on mobs and not bosses, because a lot of bosses at this point are going to have true sight, so it's not going to make a difference. Though 5 sorcery points is a lot. Using one of these in a clutch scenario can be the difference between winning, losing, surviving, escaping. You have to weigh the weight of what you're doing while handling your sorcery points. Sometimes damage is great. Sometimes imposing disadvantage on a save or suck spell is worth it. Sometimes you just need to switch out and use waxing and waning, jump into another lunar phase for whatever reason you might feel necessary. But if you could save a life, end a combat, disable an enemy, that might be worth more than you traditionally thought. And you have to give yourself this idea of not what initially can my character do, but what can my party do. Because you're part of a team. Disabling a whole group of people, making them blind, means everyone has advantage on attacking them. You're in a party of 5 people, you blind one person that's a big threat, your party can tear it apart in one turn. Definitely changing the way combat works. Definitely limiting who can advance. Definitely giving you an opportunity to escape or reposition yourselves, which can change how things work. It's viable. There's a lot of great things. Healing someone has its own benefits. Just to be able to bring somebody back into the fight, or get somebody out of a bad scenario. There's a lot of good things you can do. There's a lot of variety. I really wish this kind of came on early, because you won't see this. But if this came on at 6th level or at 14th level, that'd be a real big game changer. Our final thoughts on the Lunar Sorcerer. Originally looking through the subclass, I really didn't think much of it. I thought it was just a lot of complications for unnecessary gains at certain points. But the more I got further into it, the greater this concept felt. And the more I thought about just being able to switch my personalities as the weeks and as the days go on. And really incorporating how different and how the schools of spells and the different aesthetics that come with the different phases of the moon incorporate into my character. It really helped me develop this great character with a huge mental imbalance, and it feels fun. It's enticing to play someone that's so incredibly unhinged. It's freeing in a lot of ways. Obviously, there takes a lot of player know-how and RP know-how in order to play a character of that complexity well and not be a detriment. But you have such a great opportunity to jump between being rather lunacy incorporated or more base or more just forthcoming or maybe at peace or maybe aggressive, and incorporating that really made it really important to me, the actual phases of the moon. And that really what made this character seem very cool to me. I really wish they kind of moved the abilities around and made them somewhat closer to another. I really feel like a lot of this stuff is just so far apart where if it came on earlier, some things or some things kind of just were not as complicated, it'd be a little bit easier. I like the fact that it's reducing your sorcerer point expenditure a couple of times a day, which is beneficial in making your sorcery points last longer, which if you play sorcerer regular, you realize how important those things are. That being said, I think it's great. I think it's a good enough subclass. I think it's the best thing that's come out of Dragonlance. I'm not too pleased with the feats or anything else that's out there so far. Maybe I need to give it a second go, but there's a lot of good things in this subclass. I feel pretty competent about it, and I feel like it really brings the sorcerer and works on the foundations of the sorcerer and gives you a lot of complexity and flexibility with what spells you're using and what spells you're casting and how you're using them, which is what a sorcerer kind of is. And it gives you a great new flavor that you haven't seen before. So I'm with it. I like being dark. I like the idea of being a crazy person. I like the idea of using outside influences to affect my character to make it seem like he has no control, and then seeing a scenario maybe where he loses that or that outside influence no longer exists and that character has like a break and can now be anything. And I love that kind of concept because it gives you this reason to dive into your party members and to create that relationship, because who do you trust when everything that gave you your power is out of sight? Who do you trust when you've been locked in a dungeon for a week? How does this moon affect you then when you haven't seen it? And how does that affect your character knowing that's so integral to who you are? Now, who do you rely on? Who do you look for? Like, that creates this reason to make that best friend that you can trust in your party. And I like things that do that. And I like creating concepts around those ideas, because tying yourself to your party is one of the better things that you can do. Instead of just letting it happen and just assuming that everyone's cool together, really making those character-to-character connections brings this game to a whole nother level. That being said, we're going to bring this video to a close. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. Please like, share, and subscribe. We're so close to 1,000. It's going to be awesome when it finally happens. And most importantly, thank you for giving a spooky kid a chance.